So, uh, welcome to our onwards playtest, which is not a
Hello.
hello indeed, uh, which is not a direct continuation, but it's like more like an extension from the earlier um, approaches. So now in the earlier case, which I actually should open, uh, by the way, our our games are actually generally linked. That was the wrong link. Um, I should press this one. So, open links. So, um, the links you had um, uh, should be open, but I will also share. Do. Um, um, copy. And this is, of course, the most interesting starting point. But yes, in our earlier session, we had this like fairly simple mechanics. Like mostly we were playing with like how to package something, conceive something as a role, and then how those roles can be moves. Moves can be, of course, packaged by themselves, and then this approach to the scene. But then beyond those two, we also had this idea of this project, which I'm, by the way, now thinking maybe it could be called cast, um, as in cast light or cast a spell, which kind of means the same thing. Uh, What was the finger, Eva? Was that agreement or what was the meaning of it?
Pablo knows. That was strong agreement.
Yes. So, yeah, just to have a more specific term. So, the casting idea was that if we have a situation, and maybe I'll scroll to I'll post these links in a second that you get both. But um, um, uh, like if we have a situation or structure, there can be a casting that towards also real life. Like what if the situation became a physical situation, which is already kind of traveling towards an organization in and of itself, but it could be cast elsewhere. And that's a topic that we'll touch upon this time as well, and how one could utilize such casting. Um, um, so, so roles, moves, and scenes, but then there's possibility of casting whatever is at hand, at play, into elsewhere. And there was some other stuff, but that was, in a nutshell, like the basic uh, mechanical paradigms that we were playing with. Um, mm, but that, of course, the one thing maybe to say about the scene that this was one of the most open, I think, in a good way, ways we approach the scene, which is like really how any material, like it's a scene already. Like if you take a picture, like we took this picture and that picture, um, uh, and there were scenes already, even if we didn't have anything else. But then by making moves of um, addition, which was one of these, or generate was actually the name, sorry. Generation, one could add something which was kind of like providing depth, but also detail into uh, the scene itself. And like, I think this kind of approach to the scene, um, there are some strengths to it, but that's also something we could talk about or play with later. Um, Actually, one practical question. I did make a new board, but there is also a possibility of continuing whatever we had here. Really, both approaches work. But since I put the images into the new one, or some images, we can at least start there or move between these. But to enable this, maybe I'll share both of the links first to the chat that you get them. To the chat, this first one would be the last session, and then this one would be the potential new session. But yes, so that's a starting point. But I wanted to first underline, wonder which would be the, I think I start with the things that are more practical. And maybe I'll use the old board for this. Now, first if we think of how does the play continue? Like, for example, how does the play move from scene to scene, and what kind of connects those scenes together, or scene to even something else? There are, of course, gazillion ways to do it. But I started formulating this approach, which had very hacky name of kind of scene out, which is like our kind of traditional pattern is often like that things continue by having a kind of chronology, like this thing happens first and then this thing happens, which is um, uh, has its strengths, but also, of course, its limitations. One of its limitations one could mention is like organizations actually don't structure themselves usually that way. They're kind of loops within loops. So like you can trace pathways that are chronological. First this happened, then this happened. But if you really look at it, it's more like, well, every week this happens, and then this happens, and this, or this is a repeating pattern. If a new thing arrives, then this repeats, and so on. So loops. So the scene out approach is that the basic parameter is not so much that the continuation has to happen, that if one moves somewhere, it happens after, but more like every scene can grow itself, which is kind of what happened last time. Like we were growing a certain scene. And if one moves to another scene, that can potentially start to grow it. And at that point, there does not necessarily have to be any knowledge of what connects them. There can be, but there doesn't have to be. But this allows the play of scenes having moves to other scenes. And what I mean by this, like to put it practically, let's say I'll make a practical simulation example. We had this pond of lily pads, and there was this structure. This scene was detailing itself and adding detail. It could be that we had earlier played or start playing later completely separate scene, or and scene somewhat connected, but maybe the first approach is to think of like completely separate scene. But at any point, one could think like, what if this scene was connected to the earlier scene in this manner? So for example, what if you jump on the last lily pad, you would arrive to the other scene? Or what if whatever comes from the ideas of the lily pads would be introduced as material into the other scene? And these two examples are merely kind of plucked from the mass. There can be really any kind of relations. So the structuring to put it in a short manner, is that scenes in a way relate by formulating relations to each other, but these relations can be thought of as moves, which is just a playful way of covering all the relations, but think about it, but kind of shifting the perspective to playful. And of course, that allows for even chronology. Like for example, when you arrive to the last lily pad, then you exit, and then you come to this other place, which would be kind of like chronology or even spatiality. Is like if you reach this point, you travel to another map. So it's not that these cannot do these traditional structures, but they can do a lot more. But it also moves this relation as move into the same language as what is the relation of the players from their roles to the game itself, which I think is useful. It's for many reasons. Does this summary make sense, or does it raise thoughts?
It does. I guess I'm interested in the use of the term move to connect the scenes, because who's making the move? Is it the scene itself?
Yes.
Is it you who are proposing this as a move, kind of in a game master way, or yeah, like that? I guess where the move emerges from is interesting, but yeah, it does make sense.
Like, I mean, it's maybe there is a slight amount of poetics, but I do think it's the scene itself that is making the move. Like the way I like, you could, of course, if I would call it now a rite, it would maybe be more conventional, but for me, I don't think it's necessary. Um, uh, just to kind of also to keep this sort of uniformity of language and having less pieces rather than more. But I kind of think about it in this way: is like uh, even with the move, there doesn't have to be an active participant. It's like you make a comparison to computer programs. Like if some piece of a program sends an output to another part of the program, it is a kind of a move. But if it's a mechanical program, it's not like it's making the decision. Uh, but it's still a move. And if one thinks about it as a move, it kind of allows for both. It allows for the sort of, oh, this program leads from here to there kind of reality, but it also allows for combining that with the players through the roles participating in this move from scene to scene. So you can kind of mix and match between like containing agent element, person element, or not containing that. If that makes sense. I'm too much in the weeds to maybe tell, but
Makes sense.
yeah. Because like in a way it opens up this play of like, like it's a like this is a kind of also very card like, it's like you're playing in the scene and it grows to something, and maybe you played in some completely separate play game session something else, but you suddenly realize like, hey, it would be interesting to not just connect like neutrally that these are connected, but actually take what's coming here and put it there, maybe in a particular point. And this is me, or merely opening up this possibility of that, like entertaining such a uh, such thinking. Any other comments on that? area of things. Maybe one thing I would add, because the move is a kind of a right, it kind of keeps the door open towards that. Is like um like in a way, like let's say in an organization you have a voting protocol, which is a scene, and it and then the voting protocol, after the vote becomes yes, it kind of has rights to other things. Like suddenly it has the right to put into the organization that because we voted yes, we changed something in the organization itself. So it makes a move to the organization. So you can express things like this in this simple but potentially playful, but also flexible to expression kind of way.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this move towards a new scene, and like yeah, to what extent, you know, is the new scene determined by the scene you were just in, or how much of that is you introducing new mechanics, or I don't know.
That is up to you. Like that's essentially the relations slash moves that they are set up with. Like they might not be at all, or you might set it beforehand, or you might set it during the play of the scene one, that you actually want to play another kind of a scene, and this is how it continues. Like it takes the output from the first scene and does something else with it. Like all of those would be possible. And like I think there is something like game design wise and gameplay wise potential in this kind of treating roles and kind of persons who are playing them and scenes kind of similarly, that they both are in a domain of rights like moves. But we can see about that. Yes, it's very cardy, which is kind of partially by intention. I'll introduce another one, but maybe the kind of summary of that allows for this play, which we can try out, is like if you're like mucking about, playing about in one scene, you move into another scene, or shift. Let's not mix the terms. Um, you start playing in another scene, and you don't yet know the connections, but you can like retroactively form them or form them at any point. We can try that out. But then the second, I'll use the screen or the wake pictures from the new board, which are mostly kind of, I think, illustrative in this sense. So maybe I'll use the earlier one and then refer to the new one. But okay, so like if one thinks of as an example, like what was, say, these images when we started, like before there was anything about the lily pads beyond the kind of picture itself. And by the way, everything I say here doesn't have to be about images. They could be about a real life situation or text or whatever. But yeah, like if you think what they were in the beginning, they in one sense they are kind of material on the other sense, they are kind of like surfaces, like you don't see the depth towards the um, um, because you don't have it yet. It's but then adding these elements kind of provides its own depth to the structure, like and kind of grows in this sense.
Yeah, so I'm kind of thinking about it as like these subject, predicate, object, context expressions that we're saying. And so it's like what we have in front of us are a bunch of nodes of elements on our screen.
Mm-hmm.
And we are drawing these relations, right? Where I say that this is related to that in some way. So me, the subject, playing this role, is saying this has something, and we're just making these expressions, and then we talk about those expressions, and that depth, that's the depth I think that creates the game logic.
Yes, and it's like I agree with you, like generally, uh, and kind of want to highlight this, like the growth of the depth, which is not against that there wouldn't be depth even beforehand. Like the play could start with, let's make a simple situation that there is like somebody's playing a role of that is kind of game master like, and they don't just have say a picture or a situation, but they have added detail relations into it already, and they kind of stand for, it's kind of, they are kind of the voice of that, like what's in the scene, like that's completely playable as well as start, like one doesn't have to start from quote unquote surface. You can start from any depth level. It's just like who brings the depth and who kind of tells how the scene works, kind of like somebody telling how the board game works. So it turns from for the people to not to be just an image like a board game is, but an actual system in itself. So you can start at any point and any depth of that. But then there is another quality I wanted to highlight. Is like, say, I'll move to the other screen. Maybe I'll make this slightly larger. Hopefully you see it. So say I was posing the question. Let's make a simple question. Let's call it an organization that is that functions like a playground. I mean, that's not grammatically a question, but it functions like a question. If I say that,
I just love how much life there is going on in this playground, while like simultaneously it's so grim.
yes,
Like these people look like they're having a blast.
it was kind of like okay, I might have kind of searched for another one, but I was kind of interested in the mistiness of it, because the mistiness was underlining something of a quality. Like if I say um, um, organization functioning like a playground or structured like a playground, that in itself is almost like a blurry picture or picture with mist, which is kind of creating this. In some ways, it functions like a goal, and it also kind of underlines how a goal and a question actually have the same structure. Sort of like they have some differences, but ultimately
Yes.
they are very similar.
That's the same like goals and queries in relational programming are the same thing.
Yeah, like there is a nuance difference, but structurally they are similar. But there's also like interesting way of thinking about it, like in slightly metaphoric, but maybe structural metaphor, which is like blurry picture versus detailed picture. It's like if I say an organization structured like a playground, that relation is now blurry. Like there's something there, but then how it turns into non-blurry is by adding detail. Like for example, each area, like if I now add to that a move where each area is a quote unquote realm itself in the style how playground places have a tinge of a world to them. It's still blurry, but there is some more detail in that. Like not that we have to follow that, but just for the sake of example, like how in playgrounds, like a certain castle kind of feels like one world, and I don't know, like some place with bouncy animals feels like a little bit like a realm of its own. So like that's adding more detail, but we're still in a blurry manner. But the more detail we add, the less blurry it seems. And like that opens up this interesting way of playing that. Like one could play with this idea of whether one calls it the blur versus detail continuum or calls it whatever, is this sort of recognition in play when you set something to, yes, function like a goal, function like a query, but essentially sets this sort of mist, because they don't go just one dimension. Like I could pose another question and then a different kind of mist or blurriness would be introduced to that. And then recognizing those as paths.
Mm-hmm.
Because how you like you can kind of travel by adding detail into those, which in itself is I think an interesting notion of play, like in a way, like creating navigation to this uncertainty or mist or blurriness, and then like creating a play frame of, okay, now we work to add detail here, but somebody just made this query / goal or whatever, but what it really did was make a new kind of blurry, misty dimension, which could be approached or not.
Yeah, it's interesting, this mistiness, right? I'm thinking of like if the image was clear to start with, right? And then we added like this particle layer of mist in order to make it blurry, in order for us to say something, make expressions through it, which then changed the background itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. In a way, like it adds like a new dimension there for a kind of background itself. Yes.
So like you can intentionally obstruct something in order to generate different like imaginaries about what the thing really is, and then change what that background retroactively, I think, change what the background is or was. Yeah.
Yes. Like and have multiple, like in a way they're kind of backgrounds, but they're really kind of dimensions, because like they kind of become backgrounds if you focus on them. Like if your main leading question is how is this organization structured like a background, then that's your background. Or sorry, how is this organization structured like a playground? If that's your focus, then that's your background. But if you shift your view and you take, say, a view towards it, which is like, let's say, an organization which has like works in layers, like a playground works in layers, like the height and I mean, this is not a good example just to provide some kind of shift of perspective. And if you take that focus, then that's your back.
I'm thinking, what if we bring the mist to the front? If this is a playground and this organization is organized as a playground, maybe the mist is a game in itself.
Yes.
Like a game that involves all other games, but you also play the mist.
Yes, there is that quality. Like in a way, this mist blur maybe needs a better name, but I do think the area in itself is interesting. It's kind of like a general quality of play, especially if that play is towards generation of things. That it always kind of is surrounded or enveloped in a kind of a mist blur. But I do think like that opens up this way of expressing that in game, like not ready set, but definitely there's sort of like what Leo was just mentioning, and the sort of directions of no, actually now we concentrate on traveling towards this mist, or adding details to cut away the mist or dissolve the mist from by approaching this question with more details. So that's kind of movement in the game, and that allows for expression of the kind of movement in the game.
I think it speaks to like this whole thing Pablo was mentioning with the ambiguity markup language, right? But this is like ambiguity on a visual level.
It is visual, but it's not only visual. Like in a way, like for example, the mist is created by the question. So, but if we were talking, like if I made a question to us now, yes, like now I have to come up with something. So like if
What's the question? That's the question.
Yeah, what is the next question? What is the key question for us now? Well, that's a mist / blur in itself.
Yeah,
like
I just got hit by a fog.
Yes, exactly. So it's in this sense, like the images are once again like good examples, but it's not image based. It's like if we were at the street corner in a real or physical environment, and I would ask, what should we do now? That would be a very primitive way of introducing a mist, but I would do that. That would be what would happen from that. So I think there is something interesting in that, like precisely like bringing this sort of ambiguity into closer to be tackled in play by being able to express it, and therefore put potential methods of play mechanics to it. And we can even try that out as well. There's a couple of other things, like, or probably too many, but I'll just keep on few. Maybe the one final one, because I've been talking too long and I'm acutely aware of that, is like the concept pairing which we had earlier, which is the pattern and the instance. And for that, I would say like okay, let's use an old example, like how if you have a chess game, that game is a pattern, but if you start playing it, it becomes an instance of a game. And a funny thing which applies to chess, which allows me to use this old example, is that the pattern itself is actually kind of free from, like, it's not beholden to somebody's rights. Like anybody can start playing chess, like call it public domain or whatever. But then if you talk about instance of a particular chess game, um, 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 yes, I should carry that card and people should play that card, Eva, you mentioned, of me talking too much. But I'll be short with this. Like, so yes, the chess as a game as a whole, like it's because it's a pattern, anybody can take it. There is no particular rights to it. But when people start playing it, it becomes an instance, and suddenly this player has the right to make this move, and it would be and suddenly it becomes problematic if somebody just comes and wipes the board because they're intruding on your rights to the instance, not the pattern. And why I'm saying all of this is that division, or that it's not even a polarity, it's kind of a spectrum, but nevertheless, like this pattern and an instance is something that I think structurally works for this style of play as well. That is, like we talked shortly last time, that at any point you could like share a game. Like you have reached a certain point, maybe these would be too sketchy, but you would maybe add some other nodes to make something more playable. And that would be sharing a game, but that would be sharing a pattern. But then somebody starts playing it, becomes their instance. And that in itself is potential object of rights. And this relation applies to actually all the way to thinking about the logic of Oxels as well. Like every Oxel is a pattern, but when people start using it, they create instances, and those instances can start distributing rights to people in and of themselves. But if they save something and share it, it becomes a pattern again, which is once again freely available. I'm trying to be short and summary like with this, but does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Generalizing the pattern to use it further. Yeah. And the instancing I really appreciate, especially thinking of when a game is instanced too much in a particular way, it then becomes a pattern of its own, right?
Yes. And this can be very, like, I don't know if the rapid is the right word for it, maybe not, but this kind of interchanges of something being an instance and suddenly creating a pattern can be very quick even, like say somebody makes a different version, like let's say two groups go into a different direction, then the point where they started the different versions is quickly a pattern, which they might even want to keep to know where they diverged. So like in a way, creating a pattern is kind of saving. That's one short way of putting it. Like, or saving is creating a pattern. Like both ways work. But so yeah, I have other things as well, but maybe that's enough of a premise. But to practicalize from that, from the scene out approach, the first one, like I started thinking how this actually opens up a lot of different ways of thinking about playing. Like to take an example, like some of you are familiar with the existing game Microscope, which we talked about way back when, which is this sort of fractalic history where it's mostly like people adding sentences that kind of set up larger frame of time underneath which people can set sentences again, which are more like events. and even underneath that there can be like played scenes. But whenever a new kind of frame of time in the form of an expression is set, it kind of thinks whether it's before or after something else. But you can move, like you don't have to move time forward. You can also put something before, so you can develop the time at any point. But these are just these relations. They are essentially kind of moves that what we here can think of as scenes have to each other. So that structure is completely reproducible with the kind of scene out approach. So one could play this sort of moving backwards and forwards and higher level and lower level in time with this kind of structure. But I'm not underlining that to be like the example, mostly pointing out the flexibility, because similarly one could play like traditional organization structure, like first we make decisions in our general meeting, then the decisions we make become projects of their own, which is like the general meeting scene has the right to establish these projects of their own, which people then populate and so on and so forth. Like that kind of a co-op structure could also be reproduced with this sort of scene out and scenes having moved to each other structure. So that's one direction of play, would be maybe playing those kind of like maybe quick testings on that. One other option relates to this mist or blur, which is like, well, a simple way to play it would be to pick some material, whether they're images or not or whatever, and then bring this, for example, questions, but also other forms, like the example I had earlier, which is like a question of organization structured like a playground. That created a mist, and then somebody might want to travel by adding details towards that and like dissolving the mist with that. But then somebody might produce another question which becomes its own area of travel or area to detail in itself, and to try out that kind of movement potentially from the same source and what that brings out. And for the pattern instance, I don't have a quick practical example, but I'm open to ideas. But those are kind of potential starting points to be that I wanted to throw on the table.
I personally like the organization structured as a playground. It is a bit daunting because there's a lot of games in a playground, but I like the idea of having the possibility to go detailed of one of the games in the playground, but also talk about the structure of the playground itself and the games that could be played around the games themselves. Like, I don't know, it's a nice place to play, I guess.
So that would be kind of taking this sort of potentially this misdirection, or even with that question, like of course we could come up with new questions or question-like things, even goals, because goals function in the same way.
Engulfed in the midst of play.
Yes. Oh, there was one other thing which be short with it I wanted to mention, which is like more like not its own scene, but kind of an extension to any, including these ones, which is like the practice of crossbreeding. So let's say let's take this one, like if we had this sort of miscreating, misgenerating, mis-emanating question of organization structure like a playground, but a material would be, say, this picture and these two pictures. Now this is kind of crossbreeding in a way. Like you could think of these being different scenes, but you could think that the scene is actually these both of these, and then what is the relation between them? Well, that can formulate itself as moves. But like this is like ultimately a way of enabling or allowing for crossbreeding and not having a singular focus as a possibility and the kind of potential that comes from there. I mean, not that we have to pick this, but just the idea of crossbreeding as a possibility. Any other like desires for direction of play besides Pablo's taking even the playground and the mist-like direction? Strong and soft opinions are both welcome.
Yeah, I guess I'll share just a bit of my surprise right now. Yeah, outside there is like thunder on one direction that just came out of nowhere, the weather wise. And then on the other side, it's like sunny. So yeah, anyway, that's just like something.
Yes, that is a crossbreeding in itself. Like, which also opens up this, just to kind of concretize this crossbreed at the same time. If one was to pick, for example, organization as a playground, one could take the crossbreed of, say, this image, but on the other hand, like take us. That is, the question is like, how could there be a version of ourselves as organization which functions more like a playground, like us as Exorg, or even these meetings, which could, for example, that missed, and to add one detail to it, could be like everyone formulating their like own sketch of the playground that they want to kind of expand into Exorg. So that's a possibility of approach as well. The silence tells me that I probably introduced too many pathways and convolutions, or suggest that at least. Maybe I'm wrong.
I was thinking about like what you said initially about patterns and instances, and now applying that to crossbreeding, because like every crossbreed is kind of an instance, like it's kind of the realization of a potential that exists in this realm of playgrounds. So I was kind of like just making that connection, but it doesn't bring any value.
I mean, it in a way, I think it kind of does. Like I think understanding of how, let's say, things can almost flicker between being pattern and an instance is actually a kind of reality in this kind of things. But what to do with that is something maybe explored through play as well. Because I think one could do more than what normally thinks what to do with that relation. But what if, like, I mean, Pablo supported this organization structured like a playground. Like, one possibility is to dive into that. We can always dive out. That's a possibility. Um, um, I'm mostly pushing this because I kept us on the kind of abstract level, and it would be good to dive into something. But other diving targets are also, of course, welcome.
Maybe give some grounding here. Where are we right now?
We are looking for a way to start playing the framework.
We're in a playground.
Yes.
Okay.
And there is a proposal that we could even take this organization as a playground as the first mist, and maybe it's playing with this sort of mist blur direction. Other questions, goals, producing new mists can be added. That's one proposal on the table.
Okay. We're in a playground. I'm there.
All right. Okay, maybe you should have editing rights, by the way, to this, but and the earlier moves apply, that everybody can, in the move of generation, add something, and everybody can also project or cast, which I don't now bother to go add to that move, but you get the point. But I'll add something, which is here, caption.
All right, so what happened here, right? What the hell happened to those monkey bars? You know?
That's a good
Question.
start. Like, in a way, like that's actually a good example, because like you can approach the mist in multiple ways.
The
By the way,
monkey
what a
bars are
monkey.
the one on the left or on the right?
I think the one on the left is doing pretty okay, honestly. Like structural integrity is
Yeah.
not bad. The one on the left, I'm like, what the?
Yeah. I don't know exactly what happened to them, but I do know that it is the result of play. Like
Oh yes, of
continuous
course.
play on them, sort of like wear them out in this particular pattern. So you could kind of derive the game that was played based on the state it is right now.
Okay. That's a really good move. Very true. There was some really serious play happening over
Is
there.
this actually a move, or is this like the inherent condition of life? Like we are always reflecting our path of the past, and we see the current, or we are the result of all that.
Well, maybe that is the move.
Yeah, exactly. It can be both. Like the key, like, or not the key thing, but like one, I think, useful notion is like in a way, every expression, even if it's a fits with the conventional expression, it can be a move, and it might be useful, and often is useful, to think about it as a move.
I had
Okay,
the
so we're playing in the mist, huh?
Oh, I was just thinking that I had the expression that whatever happened, and I'm very happy that I know now what they're called, to those monkey bars, is I think it's development. It's research and development.
Okay.
One could add that. like which is like once again talking about this mist, like one it has almost like troubling sense, like saying that these monkey bars are research and development is kind of like its own misty directions. And maybe at some point when, like, let's say Leo's first question, what the hell happened here? What were they playing? Which is its own direction of mist. Maybe these even conjoin at some point. That the whatever comes from what were they playing actually becomes research and development, or maybe not. But like that's the thing to be found out by traveling.
They're researching right now.
Yes, so that's now adding a detail to dissolve the mist of research and development. And maybe I'll pose a question and make a move is what styles of research and development one could glean from playgrounds and the activities in playgrounds?
There's a lot of trial and error for sure.
Yes.
There's a lot of that. And there, I assume there's some communication through the mist.
Yes, this is true. This is too much for me to type, but I'll type something. I'll put styles of research as a question, and then I'll put trial and error. That also has the communication. I'll also put exploration. And I intentionally call it exploration in the kind of old school way, because there is something about playground that kind of resembles this sort of old explorers. Like, you know, a kid comes to a new playground and then they go to a certain area, which once again has often this sort of realmic world-like qualities, one not being a completely separate world. And then they kind of take stock and go and look somewhere and check out that and walk a bit there, which is kind of like an exploration.
I think this right here is the moon. But instead of being white, it's black, which tells me that this is actually the world upside down. This is the world upside down.
Is it upside down or everything is inverted? Or is it like the
Ooh.
alter ego of the world we currently in?
Oh my God. The trees are the trees actually roots of something else.
Oh.
Whoa.
Okay. So this is actually like I introduce another missed direction, which is that this is can be taken as an allegorical image of growing through the mist towards a thought ahead, an idea that like there is a mist underneath where everything starts, and then these roots start kind of separate, but they find connections and ultimately end up in a head, and then the head actually reproduces the roots into curved mutilated monkey bars. The last part was experimental addition. Martin put mist direction, which is cool. I'll add
that's
it.
good.
Yeah.
I'll make a move that with a slot that MIST is actually an acronym
Nice.
for something. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a misty acronym in itself. That's precisely what it is. Like Let's put that in caps. Acronym. I mean, this is a great example of MIST. When you say MIST is an acronym, now what is MISTY is what is it an acronym of.
Mm-hmm.
And it's working like a question, even though it's not really a question, but it's also working like a goal, because the goal is now, what is the acronym of MIST?
No. It's interesting because it's like we are setting up a search space for like the possible solutions that satisfy the query.
Yeah.
And to keep it misty, I would say that each letter has at least 2 different meanings.
Okay. What is also interesting here, and like this is also what I was thinking of, that there is like these mist, blur, etc. are kind of drafty expressions, but really maybe through play, one finds like more nuanced way of playing with this. And like if we think of this particular modular text, which is, let's put that separate from the misdirection. Like this, MIST is an acronym. Each letter has at least 2 meanings. This is an expression of MIST. It kind of functions like a question, like, and it's also like a direction of play, or proposal or offer for direction of play. You even added the rule, each letter has at least 2 meanings.
I will return to the styles of research and add like a biological dimension or notion or reference to genetics and crossbreeding. So each letter of the acronym can be like, it's like our genes, and these genes can be combined or can be, they can interact, and depending on what kind of combinations there are, they generate new meanings.
So
they can mutate as well.
And this is also a good example of that rather than, like, even when we add details, the details can be added as like stabilizing, locking down, but they can be also added as further missed, like which is what is happening here, like with Eva's addition and Pablo's as well. Like in a way there is more detail, but actually the mist isn't kind of dissolved. Does that make sense? Like now it, like there's still like it also opens up 2 pathways of travel, or well, multiple actually. But like one pathway could be that one only respects that each letter has 2 meanings, or one only respects that each letter is a gene, or one respects both, or plays with both. I shall point out one casting. The casting is, there could be, I'll use the could, there could be an organization to be that is called MIST, and it starts out as mist, and the only thing it has is this particular text here, which says mist is an acronym. Each letter has at least 2 meanings. Each letter is a gene. Combinations generate new meanings, which could be formed. Not that I'm not saying let's form it now, but just to
That
point
kind
that
of
out.
rhymed, did it? Mist is an acronym. Each letter has 2 meanings. I don't know. I don't. No, we're just repeating the same words.
Yeah.
Which is a way of rhyme as well.
Is it?
Of form, yes.
Yes.
That's interesting. You know, I've always, I don't know. Are there examples of that kind of poetry?
Yes. Like, I mean, it's like in traditional poetry, it's considered a bad habit, but it's not
Yeah.
a completely omitted habit.
Yeah, I'm like wondering, like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like my friend Elof would have written poetry like that. I don't know.
But so, like, all of these are like, I mean, this is already kind of pointing out towards this, how there is no one direction, but like now one could start traveling. For example, take a direction from, okay, mist is an acronym, each letter has 2 meanings, and come up with these meanings. That would be like a direction of play. Or one could take each letter is a gene, combinations generate new meanings. How are the genes, essentially? Or even a combination of both. But of course, there's a lot of other things in the scene as well. Maybe one additional thought is, while I don't know what is the right term, the one thing I like about the mist is that it has this figural quality, like our world, like the world itself and the behavior of mist brings a lot of material for it. Like, you know, a mist could be very dense or loose or moving or not moving. All of these become possibilities of thinking of this quality of ambiguity as mist.
You're referring to the styles of mist?
Mm.
Mist flavors?
Yes. Not that one has to use them, but they're kind of like there on offer as a possibility if one wants to use.
Mist ice cream.
So yeah, in a way, like it's also pointing out how this um, play happens in like almost like always surrounded by mist, or in the meaning that we have kind of explored now. But maybe one thing to add, like I was playing around with this sort of pairing of mist and detail, or also blur and detail, but rather like usually blur is combined with focus, but I wanted to add detail, and one of the reasons was like, let's say we would play this, each letter has at least 2 meanings. If somebody were to play and say that the M stands for mist and something else, because it has two meanings, and would add that. This is kind of like a detail in the sense of solidifying. Like it's almost like setting stone, like one stone into that space. Of course, somebody might reject that stone and go elsewhere, but you get the meaning of that. Because if somebody added now, say, what the I stands for, or the other meaning of the M, it would start to solidify.
Which I encourage you to do and add meanings to the MIST acronym. We can always add more, so there's no wrong answer.
Maybe I'll actually make it more space.
I added a portal.
I'll make violent movements of adding more space to this. So we could even play that, like there could be this sort of party that follows a corridor, and one could ask, like, okay, do you have any other letters or other meaning for the M? For the sake of play, oh, what happened? Something disappeared. But actually, this should be M. And I add to styles of research like mapping and charting, which is a style of research in Playground.
I
Like,
think.
do
Sorry.
say.
Oh, I was just saying I was adding very, very innovatively by changing one letter. I was adding to the research mode also enchanting.
Oh, yes.
So that is, I think, what happened, also to the monkey bars. The finding out part, I think, is done by casting things into being things. So it's not like a listen. I mean, it's a listening move that kind of begins from a casting move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so it's kind of it's kind of meta musical. So like it's, you know, you hit a thing and then you hear what it was that you did, and I think that's the kind of research and development that's going on here. And that's enchanting is one of the instruments in that.
I'll add to it's another pathway, but I'm sort of interested how this is opening up into these mist-laden pathways. So I made earlier this sort of move or playground expansion, which was kind of reflected back to us, to Xorg, that each one has their own playground realm. And then I'll add playground realm. So this pathway and this misty corridor is forming this sort of question of, like, what if we place this mist slash question slash goal of that we would give this right that everyone in Xorg has their own potential playground realm, and then to process that you could open this question: what is the medium of playground realms that everybody could develop that would then become part of us or part of our palette in a way? And I added that for a couple of reasons. Like, first is, like, maybe that's an interesting question direction in itself, but then secondly, point out how thinking in this sort of mist terms starts to open up this sort of a map, a dungeon of corridors from treating every direction as like a direction of generation.
I have to share a very, like, to me, interesting image. So the first is that of the sandbox.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that of a sandbox or sandboxes, because you say everyone has their own realm. Since it's sandboxed in the one sense, it's oh my god, I didn't think about the implications of that word, but like there's this membraney quality to it, right? So there's a membrane. That's, I mean, in the IT idea, a sandbox is, how do you call it? Isolated, insulated.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this membrane. What?
Framed.
Yeah. But somehow kind of incapacitated also, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's,
yes.
I think, the idea. But at the same time, it very much isn't, because everything that happens imprints also. So, like, I mean, if like you made this move now after I added enchanting after encharting, so you clearly imprinted something onto me, I clearly imprinted something onto you, then you said, okay, so now, but everybody has their own playground, sandbox, so to speak. So there's a funny thing that is a membrane, like a kind of how to say, a separation that isn't a separation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a separation that still allows, I don't want to say a footprint, but like, you know what I'm trying to say. I have this kind of, if you fill a balloon with sand and then you can kind of squeeze it in that way, and it still imprints on the other side. Impresses. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, it's it shares qualities with laboratory, but it's also has its own qualities that the laboratory doesn't have. It's like this sealing isolation to allow for things to happen within it, but sandbox is also in some ways freer than a laboratory is. Like
it's a bit like the sentence, let's just assume that, and then you do that, and then it said, let's just assume that Helmut Kohl was gay. So now I said that.
Yeah, it's a sandbox now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I said it in the sandbox of let's just assume, like.
Yeah.
But I still was able to say the sentence, and now you have the image.
Yeah, it's also a mist, because now, if we were to play that, then more details could be added to that direction. Like, I mean, it being missed doesn't take away that it can be thought of as a sandbox, but like both are possible. Yeah, like mutually possible. Let me underline one structural possibility here. Like, because like I'm annoyingly abstractly thinking about the sense of mapping and structure and possibilities of movement that are opening here, which I think are rather interesting, which might be annoying, but what can you do? And I'll point out one possibility. Let's say that, say Martin made a role, which, to keep it simple, let's call it the keeper or the kind of game master, and they would become the game master of the sandbox. And what that could mean would be that, in a way, like if somebody wanted to visit the Mist of Sandbox, like not that they need Martin, like there's no one game master, but Martin could be a game master to introduce the realm of the sandbox and maybe develop that. It doesn't have to kind of follow the traditional game master, but it's like what the game master does is, amongst other things, it allows people to travel to a certain realm direction. But similarly, like I could become the keeper of the playground realms, for example, and then that could be another direction to travel. And what I'm underlining here, it's not just mist, but then how to approach the mist can be given roles, and therefore kind of setting interactions and setting agents in this way. Like, for a practical example, like let's say I would get introduced or interested in this playground realm as a direction to go, and then I could work on that, different possibilities, and then others could visit that, where I could like essentially let them explore the possibilities that I created, just like a game master allows people to enter the game they formed as, or represented as a scenario. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense, but
I'm really loving this. Like, I think Sandbox is a great example of a game in a playground and how it translates to an organization. It's really, it's really fertile as a place, as a metaphorical space to test out things. Yeah, I wish we could continue with this in like with this same exercise, just like expanding the playground.
Yeah,
that would be great.
I also find the very last notions about like talking a bit more about the agents and agency very interesting. Like I think there is much more to that. Like now we kind of that would be interesting. Like because now we have like this creation and unfolding and collapsing of what happens to the playground, and like how can it evolve, and like how can it be limitless while introducing certain limitations, and like applying that also to the agents of whoever is part of the playground.
Yeah, and that's kind of like I'm kind of intentionally reintroducing some of the elements from last time because they actually completely fit and even highly expand the flexibility of this. So, like, think of it this way: what we now like looked at is this way of how a situation, how it's not just ambiguity, and it's not just the ambiguity, but it's actually a kind of a mapping that works with ambiguity, the mist. But then, to make a practical example, let's say I don't force this on Martin. I could use Martin, the sandbox game master, as an example, but I don't want to force it on Martin. So I'll use myself as a, let's say I become the keeper of the playground realm, but I become a keeper, not the keeper, because somebody else could become a keeper of it as well. But also, like, that's a role. Now I introduce a role. So, but also that allows me not to think about how do I be the keeper of it. And then I could introduce scenes that I could take others into, so role scene, and give them moves to move in it, maybe with the interest of kind of developing and exploring the playground realm. But that's just one example. Like I will finally yield myself and push one example on Martin. Like if Martin would become, let's call it the warden, because he wants to be a different kind of a role of a game master of the sandbox, but a warden, not the warden. And maybe he would have scenes or something else that others could come and play in. It's in an interesting way, kind of having this sort of flexibility of this sort of setting world, but it's kind of has general process qualities like any organization would have. And it's combining this, like how can one benefit from this sort of multi-directionality of ambiguity, and not just multi-directionality, but really mapping as a way of traveling, not just a way of uncertainty, but then how to turn that into generation. One can utilize these roles and scenes and moves again, just like the I mean, it doesn't even need a game master. I'm just using that as an example. Somebody could say, I'll become the explorer of the sandbox, and here's how I define the explorer. And then they could become such.
Sorry, guys, I need to be very unromantic right now. I need to jump, and I do need to jump now. So I let you to this. This is super great. I just want to, Pekko, I don't know if you like to remember this for some point. I spoke about this residency that I applied for. I don't know if I'm chosen or not. But if, then I think I could, because did I say that I wanted to, I spoke about this conversation series, right?
Yes. Yes.
And did I also say what I wanted to be doing as my work?
I don't think in detail you
No,
said something,
okay.
but
Yeah, so the idea, so I will do some kind of paper reading, research, writing, and so stuff, but I want to also kind of try to sculpt like organizational miniatures, so to speak, in that time. Like from a kind of taking from a poetic kind of, or fiction, or whatever you want to call it, like a bit what we're doing here now, but then in a way that they would operate.
yes.
So kind of let them run. Let's see how they could have a type of time of existence in kind of some substantial materialization or temporalization. And so I just wanted to say that I think I could use that sandboxing as a strategy beneath, or rather as a kind of way of maybe explaining how that is bringing something into the real. Like it's not just a thing, like a mini thing that you do for a couple of times, but you leave it, but it does imprint through. It's like this what was it called? Procedure rhetoric that we spoke about at some point already. Okay, sorry, I need to really now go. But it could be nice. The reason I just take this amount of time, it could be nice maybe to think about that. Maybe if I get chosen for the residency, then we could maybe talk about that a bit. Or if not, then we talk about it at another point.
Yeah. You could even become the warden of miniatures. Or,
yes.
I'm not forcing that, but just like making connections. Like
Sweet.
But it sounds really interesting, and it's also the miniature part is actually rather interesting because we have many approaches that would serve that or help with that, like including the fronts, which are, by the way, completely compatible with this if you make them scenes, which is another topic. But anyway, because scenes can have rights.
I run now. I send you a digital air kiss from a mustached Bob from the 50s. So see you soon.
See you, Bill.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.
But yeah, but does that make sense how like this exploration of mist and the kind of directionality travel possibilities that it opens, which then can tie into this roles, moves, and scenes, can combine and benefit from each other.
I find this openness extremely interesting and like very, very fruitful in the sense of, as you say, like it can go in any direction and you can tie it back to scenes, moves, and roles. So it's like just, it makes sense in short.
And there is a certain flexibility in this. Like, I mean, one could introduce other things. It's not like the wall is there, but even with this role is like, rather than something being somebody's project, like Sandbox becoming Martin's project, if they become the game master, even a particular style of game master or the warden, or they don't become a game master, but they become an explorer or whatever it is. And then they themselves define what is the explorer. They're actually setting the agent qualities and opening that to expression. But then like from there, they could, bring scenes and so on and so forth. Like there's a lot of flexibility in that, which is not just like passive expression or expression only to be interpreted, but expression that becomes then to be operatable.
I mean, I'm all in for the instrumentalization of ambiguity for any creative purpose. So yeah, this sounds great. but I also need to get going, so I'll be doing some stuff in the meantime.
Yes, and we are just about at that time frame where we should be thinking of getting going, generally speaking, in the matter of politeness and moderation of burden. But yeah, like so like this is kind of like, just to summarize, though, like I mean, one could tie this in many ways, but I do think there is a very complementary, expansive tie between what we now did with the mist, can be renamed, can be mechanized, organized, whatever, but that what was happening there, like this actually just opening directions as directions while retaining the ambiguity, and what we did last time. That's the key thing, like that these parts actually not just fit together, but like benefit from each other highly. I will say that some of the other parts probably have equally useful things. Not that one needs all those parts, but it's a very interesting take on process as travel, and process as escape a space and expands. Yeah, and the mapping of that expands. And I'm worried that I created only silence.
There's a model of computation called the actor model.
Mm-hmm.
That breaks down computation into precisely scenes, roles, and actions.
Yeah, no, like it's like back when I was doing kind of a project called culture coding, which was kind of coding approach to society. This was a long time ago, like in Reality Research Center. I was like taking a lot of sources, including like programming languages and paradigms, like the actor model. I think like that division, like in a way, like you can find the same division in games, in role-playing games particularly, but I think actually both offer something, like how the programming breaks down actor model is useful, but not like the end-all be-all. And similarly, how different games break it down, and even sociology has some versions of the actor model as well. Like these can all be useful in and of themselves as sources.
Yeah, it's there's so at least like with the existing actor libraries that I've seen, their flexibility is like pretty like sucks, because like you can't change the roles really of stuff at runtime, like you're just doing it beforehand. But the basic breakdown would be that like an action would be composed of like the events that you're waiting for that then trigger some other message to be sent. And then a role is what is like a tag that you add to an actor that binds a kind of action to it. So like by binding a role to an actor, you make them listen for certain events and then trigger certain messages when something happens. But the ability to change those is during runtime is kind of I haven't seen too much support for that.
Yeah, like I mean, in a way, like it is take on that, also take on moves. Yeah, Pablo said already, bias, but like it has like like this, like it's not an accident that these different approaches aim or end up with similar.
Yeah, it's good news.
Yeah. Because there's a sense to that, like once you start with humans, there's sort of like uh, the division between, for example, whether it's called actor and role or agent and role, but ultimately the same is useful in itself. But also like this like the space that they're in, which is kind of what we were taking a perspective with this mist now, um, is is also quite important. And some of these things the programs like kind of often don't have to solve, so they don't have so much to say in, like, for example, like towards ambiguity. They often don't deal with that. But of course, if you're making human organized systems and human playful systems, then you have to kind of systemize the ambiguity as well.
Well, there's the ambiguity of like from our perspective, right? We don't know what's going to happen, you know, like once you start a simulation or something. But yeah, I don't know. It's how much ambiguity is there in the unfolding of reality? I think so much.
Yeah.
But I also have like a limited perspective on the simulation. So who knows, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
No.
Go say.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
The paradoxical move of systemizing ambiguity. That was the thought I had.
Mm. It is actually, I mean, there is a good talk on like part of this, which is by a game designer. I think it's Jonathan Blow had this talk about like what is Go. Like it's actually half a page of rules, but that half a page of rules creates ambiguity, like a massive space of possibilities. But the only way to express it is to create these systems. And that's not to say that everything in ambiguity is systems, but rather that there is like often people think that systems and ambiguity have a what's the like a combative relation in a way, like an adversarial is the word I'm looking for. But they actually do have a collaborative relation as well, which is like proven by or pointed out by this sort of Go example. But the same applies here in a much more wider perspective. Like every one of our expressions has a kind of element of a system in it, like much looser system, but nevertheless like certain ways of playing. But then because of that, rather than just writing on the document without any system at all, they have this more potent way of creating these directions, which then kind of increases the ambiguity, but at the same time provides way of mapping it, which allows for further travel in ambiguity.
I mean, in a way that games are reflections of reality and at the same time constitute reality, it is inherently ambiguous in itself.
Yes. Yeah, this is which is also the nature of like when we said systems like, okay, this is our law or this is our politics, which are kinds of games by setting rules of how they're played. They also generate ambiguity by creating this sort of potential space, just like Go does or this does. But here we're kind of also thinking about, okay, this is a quality that is present in culture, but it's often not like appreciated as such. Like, for example, this sort of, let's say, systems for pro ambiguity is not really a favorite thing or generally highlighted and emphasized thing. But what we are looking at here, or what we're playing with, is systems that are kind of pro ambiguity as well, like in their own way, and that's why it's an interesting direction to explore. But yeah, I do think there is, like, just to set also this pin into the closure, is there is even a kind of game or a way of playing here, which is not set yet, but I think like the healthy pieces are there, and one could kind of solidify these things like relatively easily to give people a way of playing, like this sort of pieces, like the role and the move and the scene, but also like however to make this slightly more clear, the sort of playing with the ambiguity of the mist and how to move in this, like, which is already there. It just like would need a little bit of tuning of how to set that or express that. One could turn that into a way of playing to share. That's a possibility, certainly in the cards, so to speak. If one wants to follow that.
I think that was a good way of come to conclusion while opening up new paths for the future.
Mm-hmm. I'll add one note, which is very short, but very large. I think it can not only play with the whole culture, but introduce a relation where your default mode with the culture can be playful rather than respective.
Everything is a game. Everything is play.
But then, like, how can we play it more playfully? This yeah. I think starts to open up from here, but that's maybe for the future. But it's in this sort of like the condensation of the Oxel can, like, in the way like how you can redefine reading, and then or any part of culture, and then how you can invite others to play that. And then you are in a different way of setting up a conventional culture pattern. Yeah, that is already kind of showing the pathway, but then how to give people the way to play, not just the principle, is one pathway that opens up from here. But that's for later. But I do think it's there. But probably I should shut up now because I've talked, you know.
You seriously has meme character.
Yes. But I think just tying the knots, it can be made there. How to represent or express a default play relation to culture as a whole and everything that culture expresses. Yeah. It's closed. And now I shut up. I'll turn this off and show this picture of lily pads as a representation of myself.
Cool. Alrighty. Goodbye, everybody.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Ciao.
Ciao. I will stop the recording. I'll have